The Spanish Empire ranks among the largest empires in history. The territories of Central America, as well as much of South and North America, were ruled by Spanish monarchs. Rivers of gold and silver flowed into Spain from every direction, but despite the potential to become the richest country in Europe, it missed its chance. In this video, we take a look at how the Spanish Empire came to its decline. Keep watching until the end, it's really fascinating. From the moment Columbus discovered new lands in the New World, Spain was ahead of everyone else in exploring these territories. In just the first 100 years, it colonized the area from Buenos Aires to northern modern Mexico, subjugated Portugal, gained possessions in the Netherlands, and generally became a significant force in Europe to be reckoned with. While most countries were just planning to settle new uncharted lands in the West, Spain entered its golden age. However, first glances are deceptive. In fact, despite its vast holdings, Spain has often had serious financial difficulties in its history. By as early as 1566, the Netherlands, the hereditary possessions of the Spanish king, began to strive for independence. Calvinists in the Netherlands rebelled against Spanish rule in their land. The Spanish, who derived substantial revenues from the Netherlands, and especially from the important port of Antwerp, were determined to regain control and hold on to the provinces. It was estimated that the revenue from the port of Antwerp exceeded that from the colonies in America by a factor of 7. However, at the time, Spain had no interest in reforming on European soil. Spain was a deeply Catholic country, and even the ideas of a Protestant Reformation of Europe were unacceptable to the Spanish rulers. Moreover, the Spaniards not only practiced Catholicism, but also strove for everyone in their land to be Catholic. This was contrary to the interests of the Dutch, and so the rebellion in the Spanish Netherlands was not only not suppressed by the Spanish, but on the contrary, with the help of their army, only grew in size. Iron Alba, sent by the king to restore order, unleashed a bloody terror in the Spanish Netherlands. All this led to an 80-year war of independence for the Netherlands. In 1576, Spanish King Philip II was forced to declare bankruptcy because of the need to pay the salaries of his 80,000-strong occupying army in the Netherlands and maintain a huge navy. As a result, the army in the Netherlands revolted, captured Antwerp, and began plundering the southern Netherlands, leading to the annexation of several cities originally neutral. A few years after the scales tipped in favor of the Spanish, England intervened in the conflict. The confrontation between the two major European powers unfolded at sea for several years. Then the Spanish king sent his invincible armada to the shores of England, where it suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the English. In 1607, Spain went bankrupt. This seems somehow commonplace by now. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that at that time bankruptcies of large states and borrowing from private individuals among European monarchies were not uncommon. In 1621, Philip IV came to power, whose advisor was Gaspard Guzman Olivares. He clearly understood what Spain needed. In his view, it needed a war with the Netherlands. Thanks to the defeat of Protestant Denmark and the rebellions in France, Spain had the perfect opportunity to covertly incorporate the rebellious provinces back into the empire. While this plan may have seemed overly optimistic, it had its reasons. Olivares was a man who was ahead of his time. He realized that Spain needed reforms. Peace was necessary to implement the reforms. The destruction of the United Provinces of the Netherlands was one important step, since any anti-Hispanic coalition received financial support from Dutch sources. Dutch bankers supported the East Indian merchants of Sevilla, and Dutch entrepreneurs and colonists were active around the world, undermining the hegemony of Spain and Portugal. Thus, Olivares and the Spanish monarchs sought to accomplish several goals in one fell swoop: to achieve peace and control of trade, and to recapture profitable Dutch ports. In other words, they planned to achieve 3 goals simultaneously. At first, the Spanish army was successful in the Netherlands, and the war seemed to be tilting in Spain's favor. By 1627, however, Castile's economy was in decline. The Habsburgs began to spoil coins to cover the costs of the war, which drove up prices in Spain, as it had the year before in Austria. By 1631, barter had begun to develop in Castile due to the currency crisis, and the government was unable to collect a significant amount of taxes from the peasants. This is because it is difficult to collect money when part of the population does not participate in the economic life of the country at all. Thus, Spain found itself totally dependent on the colonial gold fleet. It was like sitting on a gold needle. Spanish armies in Germany had to extract everything they needed on their own from the lands where they were stationed. The situation was repeated. Spain sought to conquer the Netherlands in order to start reforms in peacetime and generate income from Dutch ports. This required money for an army, but there was none. In addition, there was a rebellion in Portugal, which Spain at first ignored and only after 20 years tried to suppress, but without success. Spain retained vast territories in Europe and around the world, but she had to constantly fight for the status of a great power. the country was plagued by poverty and suffered from economic and demographic crises. Nevertheless, the monarchs continued to spend huge sums to maintain the country's great power status through lavish receptions and etiquette. It is important to note that this description refers to the Golden Age of Spain, so further events developed much faster. In the last decades of the 17th century, there was a decline and stagnation in the economy and political life of Spain, while the rest of Europe was actively introducing sweeping changes to its system of government and society. Spain remained afloat. The bureaucratic apparatus of government established during the reigns of Charles I and Philip II required the active participation of a strong monarch. However, the weakness and unwillingness of Philips III and IV to run the empire led to the degradation of the system of government. Charles II was sickly and incapable of governing. He died childless in 1700. Thereafter, there was a change of dynasty in Spain and the Habsburgs were replaced by the Bourbons. Despite the new monarch Philip V reducing the cost of maintaining the crown, the country was torn by strife over the claims of other nobles to the throne of the Spanish Empire. This led to a new economic crisis, which became commonplace in Spain, and the War of the Spanish Succession. Incidentally, it was as a result of this war that Britain gained Gibraltar. Although the Golden Age was left behind, in the 18th century the empire began to catch up a little with its European neighbors both economically and managerially. All of this strengthened the empire's position, providing the country with additional revenue from trade and successfully overcoming unrest in the American colonies. In the 1780s, the empire's maritime trade continued to grow and the navy became more powerful, generating more revenue. Spain itself was beginning to develop an industrial sector. Although it was not very technologically advanced, its products were in demand in Europe. The greatest importance was attached to the rapid growth of textile production in Catalonia, where mechanical looms were actively introduced, making the region the largest center of textile industry in the Mediterranean. The vast colonial empire continued to play an important role in world affairs. Despite the increasing political influence of France, Britain, and Austria on the European stage, the Spanish Empire still possessed the most powerful navy in the world, and the Spanish currency remained one of the most stable. Although the Spanish Empire failed to regain its former power and glory, it has made some progress since the War of the Spanish Succession. Under the new dynasty, Spain significantly reduced its military expenditures, which contributed to the beginning of a long-term economic recovery process and the introduction of political and administrative reforms. The demographic decline of the 17th century was overcome, and the government actively recruited immigrants from other European countries, mainly Germany and Switzerland. However, at the beginning of the 19th century, an event occurred that radically changed the future course of Spanish history: the French Revolution. After its outbreak in 1789, Spain opposed the revolutionary government and Napoleon. However, France soon occupied the Iberian Peninsula. Napoleon forced the abdication of King Charles IV of Spain and his son Ferdinand VII, replacing them with his brother Joseph Bonaparte. The Spanish people did not like this turn of events, and they rebelled against French rule and Joseph, but without success. Later, with the help of Britain, the Spanish managed to expel the French from the peninsula, and after the victory at Waterloo, Ferdinand VII returned to the throne. At this time, however, an independence movement began in the Spanish colonies, which was the beginning of the end of the Spanish colonial empire. Spain had already lost Louisiana a few years earlier, ceding it to France, which then sold it to the United States. However, it still retained control over major parts of its colonies. The abdication of the kings and their heirs, 6 years of war against France and Joseph, led to confusion in the identification of the real authorities in Spain and caused distrust of them. In the colonies, this situation became even more confused. With a complete lack of political clarity in the colonies of Spanish America, a series of rebellions broke out, and the local aristocracy, whose privileges had been greatly curtailed by the Bourbon reforms, began to pose a serious threat. In 1808, the first meeting of the revolutionary government was convened in Mexico City, and revolts followed across the continent. These uprisings were usually led by local aristocrats who had lost their influence as a result of the reforms. The uprisings were caused by the dissatisfaction of the general population with the policies of the metropolis, strict prohibitions, discrimination, and high taxes, which slowed down the economic development of the colonies. The outbreak of war also contributed to the awakening of national consciousness, influenced by the U.S. War of Independence, the Great French Revolution, and the San Domingo Slave Revolt. The elite of the colonies were Spanish-appointed officials, generals, and officers who disdained the local Creoles, descendants of earlier Spanish settlers. The Creoles were denied access to the highest administrative positions. They resented the Spanish authorities' policy of prohibiting the colonies from trading with other countries, which allowed Spanish merchants to charge inflated prices for their goods due to lack of competition. Great Britain sought freedom from Spain for its trade in its colonies. The Creoles therefore hoped for British support in their struggle against the Spanish authorities. There were different interests and orientations orientations among the participants in the liberation movement. Officers from Creole families became at the head of the liberation movement. However, the most radical force in the movement was the peasants and artisans, the Indian and mestizo heirs who sought freedom from exploitation by landlords and moneylenders, and the slaves who hoped for their freedom. From 1808 to 1926, Spain fought vigorously to retain its colonies, but was unable to prevail and lost all its colonies on the continents, leaving only Cuba and Puerto Rico. The War of Independence of the Spanish colonies in the Americas was followed by periods of absolute monarchy, dynastic conflicts, rebellions by absolutists, and military coups by liberals. During this period, the country's political stability was short-lived, preventing a confident foreign policy. The last hope of the empire, if one can call it that, was Leopoldo O'Danello. Under his leadership, Spain won the war with Morocco with victories at Tetutuan and Vadras, which led to the expansion of territory in Ceuta and the return of Santa Cruz de la Marquepini. He also tried to resolve the conflict with the Philippines peacefully and even returned Dominica to the empire, but a rebellion there led to its re-independence. An economic crisis due to rising cotton prices due to the American Civil War, crop failures, and failed modernization of agriculture and railroads led to the end of O'Donnell's reign. Increased military conflicts and political divisions between progressive, liberal, and conservative forces intensified the depreciation of the country's status on the international stage. Increasing instability and persistent economic crisis led to the Revolution of 1868, followed by the formation of the First Spanish Republic. However, its history was brief and the monarchy was restored 2 years later. This inaugurated a new and more favorable period in the country's history, when the rule of Alfonso XII and his ministers brought some success in restoring political stability and the prestige of the state. This was achieved thanks to a clear assessment of the real situation and rational management. Despite all the internal difficulties, Spain maintained control over the remnants of its colonial empire until the 1870s. At this time, the anti-colonial movement grew considerably and rebellions broke out in several colonies. One of these was an international conflict that escalated into the Spanish-American War in 1898. In this war, Spain was defeated and lost its possessions, such as Cuba and the Philippines. Throughout the 20th century, Spain was stripped of its territories, and there was no longer any talk of its greatness or its restoration. Due to mismanagement, constant conflicts, and huge expenditures on the palaces and luxuries of the monarchs, Spain, arguably the richest country in Europe, found itself constantly in crisis and on the verge of bankruptcy. This inevitably led to a loss of prestige, territory, and influence on the world stage. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this fascinating journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new videos about exciting events and facts from the past. Also, leave your comments below this video. I'm always happy to hear your thoughts, suggestions, and requests for topics for future videos. See you all again on the channel.